Alrighty. Hello there. I'm glad that you took the time off to look at my presentation about phishing. What a novelty idea, right? To briefly introduce myself, I'm Miro. I'm from a company called News in the Czech Republic, and our company is helping hospitality industry in a way that we are building up basically systems for them to be able to manage their properties, right? So we're taking care of everything that happens within those properties, and that leads to us having quite a huge amount of data. To introduce the issue itself, we got into a situation about a year ago, and that situation was we were being targeted by typo squatted phishing. That, as you can see on the example, there is going to be a Google search prompt that would lead the user to something that looks like our login page because it's a sponsored Google link, right? It wasn't the case. So the user instead would land on a page that is not appnews.com, it's appmeows.com, which looks kind of identical to our login page, but obviously this was put into place to lure victims to submit their credentials to the attackers so they can further exploit them. And to get into that idea, I want you to think about problems like installing a new MacBook. You would like to use Brew, you would like to have some sort of a package manager. And if you have that package manager, you're fine, right? But how often are you Googling a package manager? How often are you installing it? Well, you get to search for it a lot, right? So you type it into Google, and again, you see something that is resembling of a valid link. It looks very, very credible. It even has a sitemap. You end up in a place that's not Brew, but Brew E. And this is such a common thing these days that it doesn't only involve our product, it doesn't only involve this, it is almost everywhere. Every single advertising platform will allow you to somehow get rid of normal and safe internet. And this is where the problem comes in. For us as individuals to take care of the problem itself, it's not that hard. You can have some DNS filtering, you can use web content filtering, you get rid of those ads proactively. But what if it's the case of our customers? How can you make sure that our customers can reflect on that and they can actually take the action? For us, it's a huge blind spot. We as professionals within the security industry are mainly focusing on our perimeter, and that perimeter is usually encapsulating the usual stuff, our application, the code, everything that lies beneath it and under it. But then you also have to realize that outside of the traditional parameter, we are right now looking into external sources that we didn't really try to focus on at the very beginning. And that would be the Google search, the Google ads. We were gathering some threat intelligence, but were we looking into who is targeting our domain with ads? Possibly not, right? And on top of that, it poses a great engineering challenge because, as I mentioned, you cannot really switch those controls on and off for the customers. You cannot tell them, just filter this out. They work in a different way than you do. So you have to think about it proactively, and you have to make sure that you're delivering defenses that are tangible for them and usable, that have good user experience. And that's where the collaboration between developers, data, and security would come in. As the goals of both of us, or let's say three of us, are usually in the middle. We want to build products that are reliable. And if they are not secure, they are not reliable. If we are letting the users to fall into these traps, we should be held accountable as well. If those things kind of happen all together, we will lose business trust and the success of the business itself. And to understand how the collaboration should work in an ideal phase, we should focus mainly on the collaboration between security and developers in a way that security, given the nature of the field, is enabling the rest of the developers to use their power, let's say, and their oversight to minimize the friction between the silos that we are building over and over again. So just imagine having, let's say, a library that is allowing all of the teams to implement authorization frameworks in the right way. Having a centralized pathway to mitigate potential issues even before they start. After that, looking into the focus of your company and trying to lean into it with the security goals that you have. So in a way, making sure that you partner up on problems even before they start, and try to understand that sometimes you need to bend those policies that you've implemented. You need to rethink the ways of you securing the business in order to maybe push out some cool feature that will allow you to enter new market. And with that, you are enabling a proactive culture of communication between the two teams. Without that, you will not succeed in building something called a shared responsibility model. So just imagine that you are building those security libraries and you get developers to help you. If you're seen in security as only the very last check as the gatekeeper, it's not going to happen. And you're going to end up building short-sighted defenses and maybe playing whack-a-mole instead of looking at the bigger picture and adjusting the culture and the security of your product. How does it look in action? I think that it is important to note that the Security Champions program is something that can help you a lot. I'm just wondering if any of you have ever heard of it. And if yes, how many of you are implementing it within your companies? Okay, cool. So this program is essentially allowing the security team to create a culture, again, a shared practice guild, where you are able to exchange ideas, you are able to get the security champions, which are developers, product managers, designers. You can expand that in so many ways that you can build on top of it almost every single part of the organization. But then those people who are proactively seeking your help and helping you build the security practices are allowing you to use their agency and spread that knowledge to the teams, which will allow you to get on top of security incidents in quite a quicker way. And they also allow you to get new ideas, because let's be honest, we continuously need to rethink what we are doing, and having the context of the people who are actually building those features is invaluable. And just to show how minute details can change the view of how the product itself operates, let's look at this example of us having an invitation user frame in here. And on the left-hand side, you would see that we had the admin as like the very first thing that the user would see. Doesn't seem like a lot. So then one of the security champions took the agency, shifted it over to the right, created some sort of a notification that, you shouldn't be really doing this. It's an overprivileged role. Rethink your decisions, please. And just that alone drove the adoption of the admin role in the new users down by 20%, which is just great. And this is not a big issue or a big change to the code. It's just visual guidance. And this is something that we need to consider as well, because during the time of phishing, reducing the number of the privileged accounts is a key to success. It wouldn't be a topic about security champions if I didn't mention threat modeling. And it doesn't really only encapsulate the stuff that happens usually within the usual threat modeling sessions, right? We are trying to focus here on the SEO poisoning that you've seen, on the phishing that is happening, and we're trying to build the features together. So having somebody who is good at threat modeling, and then the people who are the owners of the product and the domain owners in the same room to come up with the defenses and try to understand each other's views, will lead you to a pathway where you are able to design those new features or even do retroactive threat modeling quite comprehensively. From the perspective of us as security guys, we would look into it from the side of, oh, we know the whole pathway. How are they trying to attack us right now? And we're trying to continuously assess in which ways could we protect ourselves. And with the knowledge of the developers and their ways of designing the features, we are able to create something that will most likely not end up in a way that you would build some obscure pathway to mitigate it. At the end of the day, the product is not vulnerable if you just take the server plug out of the wall and you're fine. But this is not what we want to do. We want to focus on the topics for the threat modeling specifically. We want to make sure that we are hitting the right domains. So it is very similar to let's say, the threat methodology, where we're trying to look at the possible pathway to exploit something that is happening within the product. But in our case, we are tailoring this strictly to that problem of phishing. And that would be, how are they spoofing our page? How can we make it stop? What if they stop spoofing our page? Will they just not use the library of the context that they were able to phish to target them with more targeted phishing? How does account takeover happen? And if it happens, how do we prevent it? Can we even prevent it? And how do we create anomaly detection strong enough that would tell us that the account takeover happened with quite a high confidence? And then, how are they leveraging the access? So again, back to the topic of the security champions and that 20% decrease in the admin role adoption. Those are the things that you need to think about, just how to create friction at every step of the way, because there is not going to be a silver bullet to social engineering anytime soon, unless people will stop working with the computers. And the idea kind of helps you to build not only a community, but something that is a part of the security organization within, let's say, an R&D org. When we were talking about the data that we didn't have at the beginning, right now we started accumulating the data about the Google search. We started accumulating the data about, let's say, new certificates being issued that would look like our domain. So from the product that was blank at the very beginning, we now have a product that serves as a sensor. And that sensor is incredibly powerful. With that, you know that you have the full intellectual property of how that code was built. It is not just some random connector that you're integrating into your SIEM. It is something that is helping you to create your own automated response, because you have that community of practice through the security champions, and you are able to create something quite fast and take action promptly. And once you establish something like this, you can also leverage that into a pathway to have a very proactive communication with the customers, because it's not only about the trust between developers, security, data. It is about the trust of the customer versus the provider as well. And since we established the organization structure, let's be fair right now, we can also look at the technical part, which would be the defenses and maybe some hints and ideas at what should we be building and focusing on. One of those parts is obviously the authentication and the login page protection. So we've just seen that they are basically getting through our front door. So how do we focus on that? We need to create some sort of a anomaly detection, and that anomaly detection needs to tell us how strong is the indicator that we are trying to be after. And then maybe let's think about the features that will support our cause, not necessarily, creating new roadblocks in front of the attackers, but let's maybe focus on the features that we have within the product that are actually neat, while sometimes also being secure. So, authentication. Obviously, the biggest part during battling any sort of a phishing incident would be 2FA. And with 2FA, let's create a hypothetical scenario right now that the user will land on our phishing site. They will submit their credentials, but then the attacker stumbles upon something that we've just created and implemented. And that would be the WebAuth and challenge, which is basically passkey, FIDO. The implementation of passkeys sounds horrific, but it isn't actually that hard. It is well documented, and I would suspect that if anybody of you is building an host authentication, they should focus on that as well. The problem is the adoption, obviously, but more on that later. And based on that, you could just dismiss this whole idea, right? And you can ban the user from ever getting into that product. But you can also use the other indicators that you've gathered. If you have a device detection, if you have anything that would allow you to gather more information about the potential signals, and then you can take action about future attacks that will come up from such an indicator. And besides that, we also have the possibility of using the same technology that banks have been using for quite some time now. So if you have a normal user that is just browsing the stuff without looking into any sensitive actions or without any hindrance of the product, you just let them go as usual. But if they want to charge somebody more money than they should, maybe there is an opportunity for you to have that action triggered to make them re-authenticate themselves. And once you trigger that, again, this is something that needs to be in the right boundaries. You shouldn't be re-authenticating every single thing that the person is doing, but you need to be cautious about that as well. And the neat thing about this as well is that the WebAuthn library has it implemented within itself. They were already thinking about it. They were thinking about people using passkeys to re-authenticate. So then you can leverage the relationships that you have within the company with the security champions, and you can, again, try to make it a centralized effort to mitigate any potential issues. So just releasing into like Slack channels or in Confluence that you have such a feature that they can use in front of their sensitive endpoints will help a lot, because the overall posture is just going to be happier and happier. And let's shift away for a bit to the protection and monitoring of the login page. So in here, there is just a very basic example of a canary token. And canary token can be embedded into those login pages in way too many different ways. But let's focus on the simple example first. So at the left, you have your product where you've hidden a canary token, which is something like a 1-to-1 pixel somewhere, right? And then you are basically just looking out if that canary is singing from somewhere else than your product. So if it sings from a product that's called scam.ai, it will trigger an alert. It will help you gather information about where the attack was coming from. And if it was landed on your product or loaded on your product, rather, it will just not do anything. And in cases where you want to push this forward, you can reuse canaries in way too many different ways. So just imagine that you want to have a protection against internal scraping. You will just create a dummy endpoint that will call a canary, and once somebody authenticated is trying to scrape the product from within, you will know what is happening. Same goes for LLMs. When you have some prompt injections, you can create alerts based on that, and the same goes for internal systems, so on and so forth. It's just super powerful. Again, something that can be centralized and distributed to the other teams. And then let's have a look into how JavaScript and CSS could help us. With JavaScript, it is not quite often enough that the pages would be copied, let's say, 1-to-1. More sophisticated attackers will try to create their own version of your website. But in this case, you can at least try to create some friction and increase that entry level for those people who would try to cause you harm in this way. So by using a simple variable within JavaScript, which is a window location, which shows you the host name at which the JavaScript was loaded, you can, again, just decide if you want to allow that behavior or if you want to play with it a little bit. And I'm a big fan of never showing your hand. So once you know that somebody is reusing your content in a harmful way, make it break a little. Just, you don't have to break it altogether, because then they will just pivot immediately. But play around with it a little bit. Maybe sometimes, the passwords are not working, sometimes they are. Well, so that's the concept of the defense, and that's the concept of not showing your hand and creating frustrations. Then when it comes to CSS, we can have a consideration of basically the same situation. You have your own CSS, and as was mentioned here previously, the attackers tend to usually copy CSS quite more than JavaScript, because CSS tends to be unencrypted, and it's quite easy to see where the stuff is coming from. But even then, you can load it with malicious payload. You can load it with, let's say, safety belts. So if your users are actually submitting the credentials somewhere outside of the parameter of your product, you can just invalidate, again, one or two of them at the beginning. Stuff like that can be implemented. It leverages the very basic knowledge, and not every script kiddie will be able to bypass that. But we will see, right? Because 2 days ago, Google released some sort of an AI in Chrome that will be able to copy the website or create websites. So I'm actually eager to see what will that bring for us. And the part that we cannot omit, because without it, we are still blind, is data. In data, we can look at it from two different perspectives. We can have a consideration of internal data that we have within the product. And with that, we can work on a way to obfuscate it in a way that we will create more frustration for the attackers again. So if you know that you have an attacker entering the product with very high fidelity, you can obfuscate the data. And you can obfuscate the data in a way that, again, you're creating a centralized pathway. You guessed it. And if you create something that is common across the product, you will be able to leverage that quite nicely in other teams. And we're not stopping at obfuscation. You can reuse the reauth. You can also make sure that you're luring the attackers into honeypots, which is a little bit more tricky depending on the cases. But there is just so many things that you can do to kind of try to tighten up those curtains that you have at your house, so people cannot actively rob you of everything that you have there. And from the perspective of logs that we are getting from the product, since we are working with a security operations center that is using the product as a sensor, we are able to look at very basic indicators into higher risk actions and then correlation data. And just for a simple example, let's say that you have an impossible travel reported, that user is immediately trying to trigger MFA settings change. And then you see, oh, hello, I've also notified myself that Google ads are being, again, targeted towards our domain with a poisonous attack. So there is big enough chance that this user was taken advantage of, right? And they usually don't need that much time to, get what they need and create backdoors, but you can actually help yourself with anomaly detection quite a lot. What about the defenses that help us even from the perspective of the customer experience? For us, one of the biggest examples of what we shouldn't be building, because we tend to be very proud about the stuff that we build. And if we don't build it, we don't really like it. But software for assessment of digital footprint was something that technically is not a big problem to build something that works. But it is a problem from the standpoint of being able to retain those relationships with domain owners and registrars, because there are so many registrars in the world with many different languages that, it's just not fun. So in this case, it is better to have a look at vendors. And those vendors will allow you to monitor assets of your brand. They will allow you to look into logos, look into fonts, look into basically even static pieces of text. And obviously similarities between yours and attackers' domains. They're scanning issued certificates on the internet, so on and so forth. But not only that, they also allow you to take down the attackers' websites, their resources, stuff like that. So usually when you would take down a website, they would just pivot to creating a DNS record for MX, so they could start sending out emails that are similar to your domain. So, you know, they're very efficient in their operations. And it also allows you, when you're using such a tool, to enforce continuous vigilance with not only your internal employees, but also with your customers. Because you can twist it in a way that you will create a report abuse button somewhere in the product where they can proactively report those phishing cases. And once you will be building a case for a takedown, it is quintessential to have as much ammunition as possible. So let's say you know the IP addresses where the attackers are coming from, you know everything like that. And you also understand that they are phishing people through WhatsApp afterwards. So you submit the WhatsApp messages, and it begins to create such a comprehensive issue and such a comprehensive case that even Google cannot ignore it afterwards, and they have to take down those ads. So that's the big advantage of, again, being there on the forefront with the customers and taking that into consideration. And if we are considering a system that is allowing their customers to send out emails, you are obviously already looking into domain settings of the customers that you're allowing to send the emails from, to kind of look at their DMARC, look at their DKIM, SPF, the classic stuff. But also, you can think about it in a little more depth. So creating something like a reverse proxy, which looks not that horrifying, but it looks like this, where you are, once the email is starting to be sent, it will get into a queue. That queue will then decide if the email was already assessed. Let's say you have a link within that email, right? And you want to make sure that that link is not malicious, or you have some sort of a protection against it ever being malicious. So you just send it over to an assessment page where the internal security operations will assess it. And sometimes we actually do use LLMs for that. That prompt is ginormously huge, but it tends to help a lot. And once a decision is being made, every single piece of content that's within that email will be wrapped by something that is a link that is issued by you, your domain, or some other specific domain. And from the user perspective, it will look like this. So the user will receive an email. It looks like a wrapped email. So instead of, let's say, link to google.com, it will be a link to news.com. And in a case that the link is valid, it will let them to access Google. But in case it wouldn't be deemed as valid, they would land at a page where it is telling them that they were attempted to get phished. And again, this is something that we can then take to the customers and we can proactively communicate it with them. So it serves as like a soft recall function in some cases. Quite neat. And one of the last parts is actually something that we took an inspiration from a lot of the companies these days. And that's a security center, because we're not building a product that would fit every needs of the customer, right? Like every single customer will have a different look at the problematic. They will have different needs when it comes to just usual product basic stuff. With security, there's no difference. So once we created the dashboard where they are able to look at their security settings, we gave them quite an easy way to just toggle around if they want to use passkeys, if they want to enforce them, if they want to use device auth, if they want to have some branding, stuff like that, that would allow them to distinguish a lot of the illegitimate traffic. And then we decided to gamify it. And this is something that Microsoft has done years ago, obviously. But I didn't expect how effective it would be, because it's allowing the users to compare themselves to other customers of the same size. Obviously, everything is anonymized, but we kind of gamified their security posture, and this way they were more aware, even though it was just chasing stupid numbers that they don't have recognition for almost, right? So what to take away from this? Basically, everything is about collaboration when it comes to these severe topics. And without empathy, without building a practice that is actually scalable, you will end up in a place where you're not able to solve incidents quite fast. Because in a case of a long-running incident that is encapsulating security, let's say you're trying to mitigate something for a month, it is so hard to find the right people if you don't know where to find them. And threat modeling is not going to work if you're not going to be very frank with each other, and if you won't have that sort of a relationship between those two parts of the organization. And also, data engineers will not know which type of data do you need. So being on top of that as well, making sure that your CM is provided with the context that it needs is quintessential. And that's what creates a better product experience, not only for us as the developers, but also for our customers. And I think it would be fair to say where we had issues. I've told you that you shouldn't make assumptions. We made a lot of them. So we were like, oh, it's hotels, right? Everything will work the same. No, it doesn't. So we made so many assumptions about their architectures. We didn't consider them all that much in those discussions, and by a product of that, we created such a security burden that they were just confused what's happening sometimes. So it was just immature on our part. And as I mentioned in that digital footprint assessment, we like to build things a lot. And we tend to go deep into the problems, and sometimes we lose track. So instead of looking at, the low-hanging fruit, we were like, no, we're the engineers who are going to solve this once and for all, and we didn't. So don't do that, because that will lead you to, again, focus on patching over doing something that has a meaningful future. So looking at bigger problems and trying to bring the whole organization together is much better, even for your career in the future, than just looking into it from the point of an engineer. And all of this combined into subpar user experience in some cases, and it doesn't end well in those cases. So you need to focus on making the product for the customers. If they trust you, they're going to forgive you quite a lot, but again, you shouldn't be testing their patience. Where do we go from here? So acknowledgement of your legacy issues, and I'm not only talking about a very common topic in here, which is technical debt, because everybody says that. I'm going to be talking about previous sins of building something unscalably when you know it wouldn't, which is technical debt, but also in a pathway of you handling communications with the teams, trying to assess your procedures. Generally, this is something that should happen once you are facing such a problem, because chances are that you will find something in the past. And we've done a lot of retroactive threat modeling sessions, and it was just blasphemously huge. That backlog that was created as a product of it, I couldn't recommend it enough. That will allow you to start building that culture and the foundations for secure development in the future. It's not just a buzzword. You need to live it. If you don't live it, you will not go nowhere, and security will always be the last gateway instead of a proactive partner. The users of your product need to have some sort of a lever, and they need to be aware of what's happening, and they need to obviously be aware of the features that they can use when it comes to protecting themselves, because this will not only save your time during the customer calls where you have to explain them the roadmap, but it will also create a clarity between the relationships with them. And as you get into bigger and bigger segments, at some point, security is actually a selling point. So that's nice. And then that culture shift needs to happen also in the case of challenging yourselves and challenging the teams that you're working with. Because without that, collaboration is not ever going to be successful without some radical candor. And in the end, hopefully all of us will agree that security and thus reliability is a shared responsibility. So thank you. Oh, cool. Questions. Which threat modeling framework do you prefer? That's quite a common question, but for the ones that we did retroactively when we were trying to get the whole assumption around how the product itself works, and we were trying to build some sort of a knowledge base around it as well, because we are kind of using threat models of the past as it serves a purpose to onboard new engineers as well. So we're trying to implement that as sort of a developer experience improvement. And in that case, we usually go with Stride because it's the easiest to jump to, and it is most definitely the most friendly one when it comes to errors. Oh, boy, if I knew. How do you keep your threat model up to date? So this tends to be a big issue in I would say bigger organization than the smaller ones who just started with the threat modeling. And keeping it up to date is hard when it comes to vulnerabilities that are being found. So when we have a threat model and we have like a high severity vulnerability that is reported through scans, let's say, or we would have something from bug bounty, we are trying to revisit those threat models quite a lot. Anything else? Oh, what's your approach to securing third-party integrations? Great question. News is actually an open marketplace, so we provide quite a lot of integrations. So if I'm talking just from the side of the product, we have a rigorous KYC on that side, because without that, we wouldn't be probably that credible. But usually it's just KYC and making sure that we have proof of pen testing as well. It's very surface level, but we want to have the auditing experience that we have on our product as well. So if since we are certified for, let's say, PCI and for SOC, we have to enforce that on the integration partners as well. We all know how audits go sometimes, so it's not the best indicator. But KYC, and then we are also doing internal pen testing around the implementations that we are providing them with. Have you maybe tried phishing simulation on your users, knowing risk? Yeah. So with users specifically, internally, it's not a problem. It's a problem for the customers. So internally, we can just shut down all of those things that would lead them to those sites, but externally we can't. And obviously, phishing simulations are part of the requirements for you to be a verifiable entity on the market. So if you're not doing that, you will fail. And yeah, our internal let's say phishing simulations are run by the internal security team, but they are very much unforgiving. So there are no indicators for like future performance reviews that would be taken away from the people, but you have to go through a lot of training after you fail. All good. But maybe on that point later, we are communicating with the customers quite a lot, right? We're trying to share the best practices with them a lot. So we tend to be on top of the communication after this experience, and we are kind of by proxy also testing them, which is not great, but it helps to create that awareness culture. All right, if there are no further questions, thank you again.